hit record. Alright, so there's a couple things that I am working on today, and I'm using a microphone now and I'm going to video this one as well, so you'll be able to see this on YouTube. It'll be on the Kung Fu of Louisville YouTube page, and then I'll eventually make a Kung Fu Life podcast YouTube account and put it on that, or maybe I'll go ahead and do it. I don't know. Look at the Kung Fu Louisville or check out Kung Fu Life podcast YouTube, and we'll see how this one goes. I'm hoping that this is a lot more crisp and the sound is really good because I have this nice microphone, as you can see, and I bought a little stand for my phone with a light thing and everything, so it's fully legit. I am fully into it now, and it really wasn't that expensive, so yeah, Amazon. So yeah, here we go. Episode 16, Kung Fu Life podcast. This is part 3, or chapter 3, you might say, for the Miyamoto Musashi Book of 5 Rings. Here you go, right here. You can see it if you're watching the YouTube. You can also see me if you are interested in what I look like. Check out the YouTube. A couple of things I want to mention. Oh, and I don't even know if this thing works that well, but there's a little soundproofing thing. I think it's supposed to be right next to the microphone, but maybe it helps being right here as well. Or maybe I'll move it over here so that's a little bit more into it. Also, I want to make note of this book that I just bought, The Code of the Samurai, Bushido, The Soul of Japan by Anazo Nitobi. Maybe we will be reviewing this, but I ran into this book looking up stuff about Miyamoto Musashi and the Samurai Code, and I thought it was really interesting. This book is really starts off, I've only gotten a few pages into it, but it starts off going over the how the code and really kind of how moral or how the Japanese people developed their morals through the feudal system, and through really the codes that they lived by. It's something that they learned early on, and something that we're seeing in the Musashi book. That's an important lesson to learn, is to live by a code. So, that being said, let's get to the lessons learned. So another interesting thing I ran into, and I'll put the link in the show notes, is this YouTube page there's a YouTube documentary. It's not YouTube documentary, but it's on YouTube, is what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to situate the microphone. It's not really working over there, so you just have to deal with it over here. Let's see. Okay. There we go. There we go. All right. Now we're talking. Now we're cooking. One thing about the YouTube video that I'll be posting is I'm not going to be editing it at all, so you'll see all the bloopers, the uhs, the buts, the long silences. So excuse that. It's just not, I don't want to waste the time to do it, okay? So sorry I'm being lazy, but it is what it is, right? Lessons learned. So the video I was talking about is a video, I think it's called The Secret of Japanese Sword Making. But it's just a really good video on how they made the samurai swords back in the day. And this guy in Japan, this video is old, I think it's from the late 90s, but The guy that they have videoing was, in Japan, had the whole setup as they had it back in the day. So hammering out the iron core and picking out the iron core and then hammering it out, and it's just a very interesting video, and I think it's worth watching. Like I was just glued to it for some reason. One of these days I'm gonna get me one of those really nice swords, and it's just really informative. So it's always interesting seeing a master at work, and this guy is a sword making master, handed down from generations, that sort of thing. So and one of my bucket list items is making my own sword. Eventually I'll probably put together my own forge in my own house and just play around with making different stuff. But one of the things I want to make is a katana. Lessons learned. One of the things I've learned in editing the podcast on Audacity is truncating the silences is not always the best way to go, especially for someone like me who speaks kind of low, because it ends up deleting some of the words in my sentences because I speak low. So probably if you're like Muay Thai and have a very boisterous voice and very clear and very, I don't know if boisterous is the word, but very clear, I guess is the best word, voice, then you might not have that issue, but I do. So I can't use the truncating silences, and I realize that this may have happened on some of the past podcasts, so I apologize for that. I just realized it on the last one, episode 15, so that one should be good to go, but I think 14 probably has some sentences that are cut off. I thought it was actually just that I'd already lost it and couldn't recover it, but I didn't realize it was from the truncating silences. So don't do it. Don't do that. Also, I've been using Magic Mastering, this option they have on Buzzsprout, where they basically master it themselves, so you don't have to worry about the it's mainly the noise canceling and the background noise canceling and the what's it called, the ups and downs of the voice, so that they equalize it to a professional quality. So you should, hopefully the past couple episodes you've noticed an improved audio quality. So yeah. So that was one of the lessons learned. And I guess let's go over the code, which I had been doing. There's a couple. Actually, before we do that, let's. Okay, so I was reading I was reading another book, and it's called The Tao of Health, Sex, and Longevity by Daniel P. Reed. The reason why I picked up this book is because I was listening to an interview with one of my idols, my favorite surfer, one of my favorite surfers of all time, Kelly Slater. And he was talking about how he read this book and kind of follows its diet. And so I haven't gotten to that part in the book, obviously, because I'm reading a bunch of books at the same time, but I did get to an interesting part of the book that related to the Musashi stuff. So it's about the Tao and the Tao Te Ching, which if you haven't read it, you should read it. The Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu, great book. I'll probably reread it at some point in the near future, hopefully, because it's a very good book. Kind of like the Buddhist version of the Bible almost. But here's a little passage in this book. I don't know if I showed it on the YouTube page. Oh, can you see it with that lighting? Still playing around with the lighting. This is what the cover looks like. This is what the cover looks like. All right. So this section is called The Way and Its Power. Here's how Lao Tzu illustrates the functional utility of emptiness over form and the dependence of all things on nothings. We put 30 spokes together and call it a wheel, but it is on the space where there is nothing that the usefulness of the wheel depends. We turn clay to make a vessel, but it is on the space where there is nothing that the usefulness of the vessel depends. We pierce doors and windows to make a house, but it is on the spaces where there is nothing that the usefulness of the house depends. Therefore, as we take advantage of what is, so we should recognize the usefulness of what is not. The inherent superiority of emptiness over form and stillness over activity, as well as their indivisible interdependence, is a salient point in many Asian philosophies. Most Westerners, however, geared as they are to concrete form and activity, usually find this point difficult to grasp. But the way Lao Tzu puts it, even a child could grasp it. For Lao Tzu patterns his points on simple, solid observations, not on specious, abstract arguments. Objective observation of nature has always been the primary method of Taoist of Taoist discovery, and such observation clearly reveals that the whole picture must always include what is not as well as what is, and that the utility of anything springs from the union of opposites. Water was one of Lao Tzu's favorite images, and it remains the quintessential symbol of Tao. Like emptiness, water goes largely unnoticed, yet it possesses far more te than its opposite elements. Another section of the Tao Te Ching. Nothing under heaven is more yielding than water, but when it attacks hard and resistant. But when it attacks things hard and resistant, there is not one of them that can prevail. That the yielding conquers the resistant, and the soft conquers the hard. It is a fact known by all men, but utilized by none. So a couple of things about this passage that I really liked was one, like it said, it's very common sense, and I think most people know it to be true, the things that he says, but they don't always enact it. And one of the things I noticed when I was growing up is that I came to a lot of really good conclusions growing up, but I failed to enact them. I failed to utilize the conclusions that I came to an appropriate degree so that they could make a difference in my life. And I realized that later in life that I should have listened to myself and followed through with the things that I had discovered on my own. Or not really on my own. I mean, obviously you learn things through reading, your parents, school, that sort of thing. But, when the thought occurs to you and you understand it, then you need to implement it, is what I'm trying to say. And I think that's part of what one of the things I realized was in this first passage where he's talking about how it's the empty space that makes the utility of everything. If there were no space there, then there would be no point for that object. And the utility of that object would be nothing. Like the whole point of having a house is for the space inside the house, not for the walls and the floors and the roof and that sort of thing. It's actually so that you can have the space, the empty space, which is a really cool way to think about things. And when you're studying Kung Fu, sometimes you want to look at things sometimes you want to look at the negative spaces, is what I call it. And I don't really know if the negative is actually the best way to describe it, but it is one way to describe it. So he just describes it as empty space. So I really like that, and I think this is one of the things that Musashi addresses in his book as well. And then the whole thing about the water. I mean, that's obviously where Bruce Lee got his be like water spiel, and so I thought that was useful to read and to look at. So, anyways, that's the Tao of Health, Sex, and Longevity. I haven't gotten there very far. I haven't gotten past the intro. That was actually in the intro. But yeah, but so far seems like a good book. All right. Now let's get to the Miyamoto Musashi. I'm also not sure how or where I should be with this microphone. Should I be this close? Should I be this close? Doesn't matter. I don't know. We'll find out. All right, chapter 3. Hold on. I got so many different bookmarks and stuff. Hard to keep track of these things. Hopefully we can get through this one pretty quickly, but it's a fairly long chapter, so I'm guessing not. Chapters 4 and 5 are very short, so I expect those to be shorter. There we go. All right, chapter 3, the Fire Book. In this, the Fire Book of the Nito Ichi School of Strategy, I describe fighting as fire. In the first place, people think narrowly about the benefit of strategy. By using only their fingertips, they only know the benefit of three of the 5 inches of the wrist. That's an interesting line right there. You should think about that one, especially if you're actively training Kung Fu, Wing Chun Kung Fu in particular. They let a contest be decided, as with the folding fan, merely by the span of their forearms. They specialize in the small matter of dexterity, learning such trifles as hand and leg movements with the bamboo practice sword. In my strategy, the training for killing enemies is by way of many contests, fighting for survival, discovering the meaning of life and death, learning the way of the sword, and judging the strength of attacks and understanding the way of the edge and ridge of the sword. You cannot profit from small techniques, particularly when full armor is worn. My way of strategy is the sure method to win when fighting for your life, 1 man against 5 or 10. There is nothing wrong with the principle 1 man can beat 10, so 1,000 men can beat 10,000. You must research this. Of course, you cannot assemble 1,000 or 10,000 men for everyday training, but you can become a master of strategy by training alone with a sword, so that you can understand the enemy's strategy, his strength and resources, and come to appreciate how to apply strategy to beat 10,000 enemies. Any man who wants to master the essence of my strategy must research diligently, training morning and evening. Thus can he polish his skill, become free from self, and realize extraordinary ability. He will come to possess miraculous power. This is the practical result of strategy. And this is very, very Wing Chun. In the beginning, sort of in the middle, I guess, he's talking about training. He says the training for killing enemies is by way of many contests. So basically he's saying you have to, and then he says fighting for survival, so on and so on. And this is true, I think, in many cases. if you really want to learn how to fight, you really want to become a master of fighting, you have to fight. You have to fight for real, not just in competitions, but for real. And I think that it is missing from a lot of people. I know it's missing from myself. I haven't really. I've been in a couple altercations, but I wouldn't really call them like fighting for life or death. Uh, and to really understand it, you have to do it. But that's not practical in these days. The best you can do is go sparring. I mean, really, the best you can do is go sparring, unless you want to be a jerk and go out looking for fights, which you can. But there's so many consequences to that it's not worth it. You can go to jail. You could die. You could get physically injured, like permanently, and it's just not worth it. Plus, it's just bad karma to go out and start fights. It's not a good look at all. So the solution to that is to go spar with people. I encourage all my students to go sparring when they hit the 3 to 4 year mark. And not saying that they have to. I think that's one of the beauties of the Wing Chun system, and really, all the legitimate systems out there, is that this is knowledge that was distilled from everyday fighting. That's what makes it so powerful. I mean, these people that developed this technology, or science, were out there every day fighting. They were in battles, large battles and small battles, but fighting to the death. And so you can't get that knowledge nowadays unless, you can get it. So, obviously we have war still. People still go fighting out, but it's different. Obviously, we have more advanced weapons. There's not so much hand-to-hand combat, although there is some, I'm sure, but it's different. You're not going to become a master of martial arts, a master of fighting, by going into a modern day war. Let's delete that part because I don't know that for sure. But the point is that these people back in the day, they fought hand to hand. Their entire lives they did this. So to say that they created systems to preserve the knowledge that they learned. And so people who are training nowadays, they might not ever be able to get to that level because they're not using it the way they had to use it back in the day to survive, for life and death. And that's what Musashi is talking about in here, because that's what he did. He went out and fought to the death, killed 60 men, or had 60 duels, and he won all of them, killing many of them. So it's a different world today. So you have to respect the systems that you learn, and you have to understand that you're not going to learn what they learned back in the day, unless something happens or maybe you're in a different country and you do have to fight for your life all the time. But here in America, very few people have to fight ever. So you've got to respect that and understand it. And if you are looking at trying to really become a master fighter, the only way to do it in a moral, let's say, way is to go spar. Do some competition fighting, that sort of thing, and figure out what works and what doesn't work for you, and how the system works. So I have a student actually that's currently working on that. So we'll see where that goes. But keep that in mind. But the system is there. You learn, the knowledge. The knowledge gets ingrained into your bones, and it will come out if we get into some sort of crazy apocalyptic situation. And you have to use your kung fu for real, then you can trust that it'll be there. And there'll be a learning curve, of course, but you'll you'll be much further ahead than anyone else who hasn't trained. So keep that in mind when you're training. Just something to think about. And that's what Musashi is talking about here. At least in that last passage. So next section. Depending on the place, examine your environment. Stand in the sun, that is, take up an attitude with the sun behind you. If the situation does not allow this, you must try to keep the sun on your right side. In buildings, you must stand with the entrance behind you or to your right. I think he said the right side because they typically hold their swords on the left side. Make sure that your rear is unobstructed and that there is free space on your left your right side being occupied with your side attitude. At night, if the enemy can be seen, keep the fire behind you and the entrance to your right. Otherwise, take up your attitude as above. You must look down on the enemy and take up your attitude on slightly higher places. So he's saying get the high ground. And of course, just in case you don't know, I mean, obviously the sun at your back is better because it's not in your eyes and it's in your enemy's eyes, so it's harder for them to see you. For example, when the camisa in a house is thought of as a high place, When the fight comes, always endeavor to chase the enemy around to your left side. Chase him towards awkward places and try to keep him with his back to awkward places. When the enemy gets into the inconvenient position, do not let him look around, but consciously chase him around and pin him down. In houses, chase the enemy into the thresholds, lintels, doors, verandas, pillars, and so on. Again, not letting him see his situation. Always chase the enemy into bad footholds, obstacles at the side, and so on, using the virtues of the place to establish predominant positions from which to fight. You must research and train diligently in this. He's saying use the terrain to your advantage is what he's saying. And of course you want to do that. You want to keep them off guard. But to do that, to do what he's talking about, you really have to have a good awareness, situational awareness. So you have awareness of your surroundings and you can use them accordingly. Now, I don't know what the kamisa is, but let me look that up real quick. Kamisa. The kamisa is the top seat within a room, meaning the seat of honor. So I think this is, obviously this was back in the day. It was, let's see if we can find a picture of it. So that's where the most important person present is supposed to sit, or the guest of honor, highest ranking, whatever. So it's elevated. So it's like you're on a pedestal. So you have the high ground. Okay, back to the book. The 3 methods to forestall the enemy. The first is to forestall him by attacking. This is called ken-no-sen, to set him up. Another method is to forestall him as he attacks. This is called tai-no-sen, to wait for the initiative. The other method is when you and the enemy attack together. This is called tai-tai-no-sen, to accompany him and forestall him. There are no methods of taking the lead other than these three. Because you can win quickly by taking the lead, it is one of the most important things in strategy. There are several things involved in taking the lead. You must make the best of the situation. See through the enemy's spirit so that you grasp his strategy and defeat him. It is impossible to write about this in detail. But he's saying be the aggressor. Offense is always better than defense, and in Wing Chun we use offense as defense, or simultaneous offense and defense. So that's what he's saying here. That's the best way. But the funny thing is that a lot of people, including myself, the natural tendency is to do the, I think it was the second one, yeah, the Tai no Sen, to wait for the initiative. An awful lot of people like to do this. I like to do it because it's easier to react in some cases, but it's actually better to go forward. And that's, if you work out with a Muay Thai person, I think you will, especially a senior Muay Thai person, I think you will notice that that is their tendency always to push forward more than anything. So to attack. And that's what he's saying, that's what you should do. So Musashi said it. The first, Ken no Sen. So he's going into detail of them now. When you decide to attack, keep calm, dash in quickly, forestalling the enemy. Or you can advance seemingly strong but with a reserved spirit, forestalling him with the reserve. Alternatively, advance with as strong a spirit as possible. And when you reach the enemy, move with your feet a little quicker than normal, unsettling him and overwhelming him sharply. Or with your spirit calm, attack with a feeling of constantly crushing the enemy, from first to last. The spirit is to win in the depths of the enemy. These are all Ken no Shin. No Sen. No Sen. I don't know if I'm saying these right. But I'm doing the best I can. I mean, I think this is fairly common sense, pretty easy to understand. Maybe a little confusing is advance seemingly strongly, but with a reserved spirit. I think that's mainly saying being prepared to draw back if you need to, but you need to go forward as if you are going forward with everything you've got, or as strongly as you can, but knowing that you might need to back up if something changes. So being flexible, basically. Advancing aggressively, but being flexible so that you can change course. The second, Tai no Sen. When the enemy attacks, remain undisturbed but feign weakness. As the enemy reaches you, suddenly move away, indicating that you intend to jump aside. Then dash in, attacking strongly as soon as you see the enemy relax. This is one way. Or, as the enemy attacks, attack still more strongly, taking advantage of the resulting disorder in his timing to win. This is Tai no Sen principle. Obviously, you can do this in Chisao. You can feign some weakness in your technique. You might pretend like your Tansao's getting weaker and weaker, and then you know they're going to go in, so you flip it around, or you change so that you can control their hand. Because every time you attack, you're also, every time you extend yourself, you are creating an opening. The third, Tai no Sen. When the enemy makes a quick attack, you must attack strongly and calmly. Aim for his weak point as he draws near, and strongly defeat him. Or, if the enemy attacks calmly, you must observe his movements and, with your body rather floating, join in with his movements as he draws near. Move quickly and cut him strongly. This is Tai no Sen. These things cannot be clearly explained in words. You must research what is written here. So what I took this to mean is sometimes when you're playing hands with someone, you need to match their speed, or maybe you need to follow them. You need to follow them coming in with your hand so that you can regain control and regain the center line, and then flip your hand over. Like if you're doing a tonsao and they're trying to punch in, maybe you start to guide their punch in into the side. If you time it right, and if you're timing their punch right, then you can just glide it to the side and bring your, even though you're going to be choke you're still bringing their hand off center and creating an opening for yourself. That's what I took that one to mean. To hold down a pillow. To hold down a pillow means not allowing the enemy's head to rise. In contests of strategy, it is bad to be led about by the enemy. You must always be able to lead the enemy about. Obviously, the enemy will also be thinking of doing this, but he cannot forestall you if you do not allow him to come out. In strategy, you must stop the enemy as he attempts to cut. You must push down his thrust and throw off his hold when he tries to grapple. This is the meaning of the to hold down a pillow. When you have grasped this principle, whatever the enemy tries to bring about in the fight, you will see in advance and suppress it. The spirit is to check his attack at the syllable at. Attack. When he jumps, check his jump at the syllable j. And check his cut at k. The important thing in strategy is to suppress the enemy's useful actions but allow his useless actions. However, doing this alone is defensive. First, you must act according to the way, suppressing the enemy's techniques, foiling his plans, and thence command him directly. When you can do this, you will be a master of strategy. You must train well and research holding down a pillow. To me, what he's saying is you're keeping the enemy on their toes. and we practice this in Kung Fu by using forward energy, by always applying forward energy. And that's what you learn in the Muay Thai schools. Crossing at a ford. Crossing at a ford means, for example, crossing the sea at a strait, or crossing over 100 miles of broad sea at a crossing place. I believe this crossing at a ford occurs often in a man's life. It means setting sail, even though your friends stay in harbor, knowing the route, knowing the route, knowing the soundness of your ship and the favor of the day. When all the conditions are met, and there is perhaps a favorable wind or tailwind, then set sail. If the wind changes within a few miles of your destination, you must row across the remaining distance without sail. If you attain this spirit, it applies to everyday life. This is a cool thing because he's directly applying it to life. So basically he's saying you set up all the conditions to make it as right as you can, to where whatever you're aiming for, it is the clearest path possible. And everything so you plan to the point where all the conditions are appropriate for what you want to do, and then you go for it. And then even if the wind changes, cut the sails out and start rowing. So no matter what, you go for it. So you're just pushing through, essentially. And that's a good way to think about it. Don't lose course. Stay on the path. If you get off course, get right back on. He mentioned this in chapter 1 as well. Where was I? You must always think of crossing at the ford. In strategy, it is important to cross at a ford. Discern the enemy's capability and, knowing your own strong points, cross the ford at the at the advantageous place. As a good captain crosses a sea route, if you succeed in crossing at the best place, you may take your ease. To cross a ford means to attack the enemy's weak point and to put yourself in an advantageous position. This is how to win large-scale strategy. The spirit of crossing at a ford is necessary in both large and small-scale strategy. You must research this well. So it also means attacking the weak points, which of course that's what you want to do. You never want to attack a fortified defender. I think that's a Art of War quote. To know the times. To know the times means to know the enemy's disposition in battle. Is it flourishing or waning? And you know, the immediate thing that I thought of when I read this was the tides, like the tides of the ocean. It's weird how you can, not really weird, it makes sense, but it's interesting how you can feel the tides. So when you're surfing, like I like to surf, well, I used to like to surf. I don't get to do it very much anymore, but it's one of my all-time favorite activities. And if you get the chance, just check it out, try it. It's amazing. It's probably, along with Kung Fu, it's probably had one of the biggest impacts on my life. So check it out. Surfing is awesome. But one of the things you get to notice is you can feel it when the tide is going in or going out. I mean, you can literally sometimes feel the water pushing you in and sometimes pulling you out. But you can also just kind of sense when it's happening. And you can sense it pretty closely to like whether it's starting or ending. So it's really interesting, and this is kind of what he's talking about, knowing the times. I mean, it's related to knowing the tides, and that's how I kind of understood it. So maybe that helps someone else understand it. I don't know, but it helps me. By observing the spirit of the enemy's men and getting the best position, you can work out the enemy's disposition and move your men accordingly. You can win through this principle of strategy, fighting from a position of advantage. When in a duel, you must forestall the enemy and attack when you have first recognized his school of strategy, perceived his quality and his strong and weak points. Attack in an unsuspecting manner, knowing his meter and modulation and the appropriate timing. Knowing the times means if your ability is high, seeing right into things. If you are thoroughly conversant with strategy, you will recognize the enemy's intentions and thus have many opportunities to win. You must sufficiently study this. And so one of the things I also meant to mention when I was talking about the tides was that you want to adjust your position in the lineup when you're surfing based on the tides. If it's a higher tide, generally speaking, you're going to want to, and keep in mind, I've only surfed reef once, and so my knowledge of surfing is mainly completely based off of sandbar surfing, so just sandy bottoms. So in that scenario, with high tide, you need to move closer to the shore. So if you start feeling that movement of the tides, you start to go in, then you paddle in a little bit so you can catch the better waves. Because eventually the waves are just going to start crashing further and further inshore. And the opposite goes for low tide. You want to start, if you feel that, you want to start paddling out a little bit more. Each time you catch a wave in, you paddle out a little bit further than where you were once you get back out. So just a little surfing tip there. I miss surfing. To tread down the sword. To tread down the sword is a principle often used in strategy. First, in large-scale strategy, when the enemy first discharges bows and guns and then attacks, it is difficult for us to attack if we are busy loading powder into our guns or notching our arrows. The spirit is to attack quickly while the enemy is still shooting with bows or guns. The spirit is to win by treading down as we receive the enemy's attack. In single combat, we cannot get a decisive victory by cutting with a T-dum feeling in the wake of the enemy's attacking longsword. We must defeat him at the start of his attack, in the spirit of treading him down with the feet, so he cannot rise again to attack. Treading does not simply mean treading with the feet. Tread with the body, tread with the spirit, and of course, tread and cut with the longsword. So he mentions this kind of using your whole body technique many times throughout this book, which is what we train in Wing Chun. But it's interesting, he also talks about the spirit, which we don't really mention. Let me think. It may have been mentioned in Wing Chun when I was being taught, but I can't think of a specific situation where it was, well, I can. So in Wing Chun, we say it's about your intention. And so I think that's similar to spirit. So you have to have your intention and your whole body in alignment to make a really effective attack. You must achieve the spirit of not allowing the enemy to attack a second time. This is the spirit of forestalling in every sense. Once at the enemy, you should not aspire just to strike him, but cling after the attack. You must study this deeply. All right, let me pause it here. I'm going to have to pause this too. Can I pause it?